walk into a networking event, or maybe it's a community pottery class, or a local meetup you promised yourself you'd finally attend.
Right, something you've been putting off for months.
Exactly. You step through the door, and before you even take off your coat, you just like scan the room.
Ugh.
Over in the corner, two people are laughing at some shared inside joke.
And someone else is going in for this big, warm hug.
Yeah. And almost instantly, before you've even spoken a single word to anyone, your brain just supplies this narrative. It says, everyone already knows each other. Everyone here already has their people. Nobody needs me in this room.
Oh, it's an incredibly heavy, isolating feeling. And mechanistically, it's a feeling that usually dictates your behavior for the rest of the night. You keep your head down, you hover near the edges of the room, and you basically leave the exact second it becomes socially acceptable to slip out the back door.
Totally. You physically showed up, but psychologically, you had already packed your bags and gone home. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to Deep Dive 145 of Vibrations and Manifestations. I'm Jared.
And I'm Alicia.
Today is dedicated to unraveling exactly why it feels so structurally and emotionally difficult to make friends as an adult.
It really is a crisis. And our mission today is to look at this problem through two distinct lenses. First, we have to talk about the genuine structural difficulties of adult friendship, like the architectural reasons why making friends after age 25 is objectively harder.
It's not just in your head.
Right, it's not. But more importantly, we are going to deconstruct the hidden psychological assumptions we carry into these spaces. We want to understand the exact mechanics of our own social self-sabotage and how our brains essentially manufacture rejection before it ever actually happens.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the prevailing narrative for anyone struggling with loneliness is this deep sense of personal defectiveness. If you don't have a thriving social circle, the immediate internal assumption is just, well, I am fundamentally unlikable.
Which is such a painful place to live.
It is. But all the sociological data, the lived experience, it completely contradicts that, doesn't it?
It completely contradicts it.
Yeah.
The very first thing we need to establish for you, the listener, is that adult friendship is genuinely structurally difficult. When we are children or teenagers or, living in college dorms, we benefit from what is called built-in connection.
Right, the proximity.
Exactly. You are forced into prolonged proximity with the exact same people day after day. You share a lunchroom, you walk the same halls, you complain about the same exams. That environment is essentially a laboratory designed to incubate connection. But adulthood systematically strips all of those conditions away.
Yeah, you commute to work alone, you go to the gym with your noise-canceling headphones on, and then you go home to your private living space. The passive conveyor belt of connection just totally halts.
It stops completely, and this is why it hits us so hard. We aren't just culturally conditioned to want friends. It's a biological imperative. Like, evolutionarily speaking, being separated from the tribe meant a literal death sentence.
The brain interprets social isolation as an acute survival threat.
Precisely. This is why the U.S. Surgeon General recently issued a comprehensive advisory on social connection, formally labeling loneliness as a public health crisis. Chronic loneliness fundamentally alters our physiology. It increases systemic inflammation, it elevates cortisol levels.
It carries a mortality risk comparable to smoking like 15 cigarettes a day, right?
Yes. So wanting connection isn't a symptom of being needy. It is your biology operating exactly as it was designed to.
And you can see this tension playing out everywhere right now. You hear people talking about this constantly, like Mel Robbins and Emma Chamberlain have both done these massive deep dives recently dedicated to this exact crisis. Chamberlain talked extensively about the sheer exhaustion of the friendship audition phase.
Oh, the audition phase is brutal.
That feeling that you have to constantly perform to earn a place in someone's life. And Robbins, she dismantled what she calls the myth of organic friendship. We carry this expectation that adult friendships should just form effortlessly, exactly like they did in high school.
Right. And when they don't, we assume we're broken. But Robbins argues that adult friendship cannot be organic. It has to be deliberately scheduled, which often feels really transactional at first, but is actually a necessary structural requirement.
Which brings us perfectly to the insights of Jeffrey A. Hall. He's looked into the actual metrics of friendship formation, and his findings are they're staggering. Hall's data shows that it takes roughly 40 to 60 hours of accumulated time together to move a relationship from a mere acquaintance to a casual friend.
And significantly more time to reach the level of a close friend.
Right.
The underlying mechanism at play here is the mere exposure effect. The human brain is naturally wary of novelty. It takes dozens of hours of predictable, repeated exposure for your nervous system to stop treating a new person as an unpredictable threat and start categorizing them as a safe, known entity.
It takes time.
It takes a lot of time. Adult friendship requires the slow accumulation of time, not the spontaneous, magical chemistry we are sold in rom-coms.
I have to admit, when I first learned about that 40 to 60 hour metric, my immediate reaction was just despair. Like, if I go to a 1-hour professional meetup once a month, mathematically, that is 5 years to make a casual friend.
It sounds so daunting.
The logistics of that seem almost impossible to overcome. If the required input is that high, how do we ever cross the threshold without just giving up out of sheer exhaustion?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding the sheer volume of time required is actually the key to surviving that exhaustion. It completely recontextualizes the awkwardness.
Like by lowering our expectations of those early interactions.
By normalizing the friction. When you understand the 60-hour rule, you realize that an awkward coffee date isn't a red flag indicating that you are incompatible. It is just the natural friction of hour 3.
Oh, that's good. Hour 3 friction.
Right. You aren't failing when conversation stalls or when you feel like you're forcing it by sending a follow-up text. You are simply in the mechanical phase of building safety. It requires intentionality because you are fighting against an adult infrastructure designed for isolation.
So it's less like a pass or fail audition and more like compounding interest in a savings account. Those first few deposits, the quick coffees, the short text exchanges, they feel incredibly insignificant. You look at the balance and think, this isn't a friendship, this is nothing.
Exactly.
But if you understand the mechanism of compounding interest, you know that those early awkward deposits are mathematically necessary to eventually cross the threshold into a high-yield return.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The structure is inherently difficult. But that brings us to the second, and honestly the more insidious half of our deep dive today, how we take a structurally difficult process and actively sabotage it with our own psychology.
The internal blockages.
Yes. And this is where we weave in the philosophical overlay from Neville Goddard.
I love Goddard. He's primarily known for his work on the power of the imagination and self-concept. We've talked about his concepts like mental diets and the power of awareness on this show before. He posited that the inner conversations we repeatedly rehearse establish the baseline from which we experience physical reality.
The human brain is, at its core, a predictive engine.
Yes.
It is constantly trying to anticipate what will happen next to keep us safe. Goddard's concept of inner conversations highlights how this predictive mechanism goes totally awry in social situations.
It really does.
Long before you ever face actual rejection from a new acquaintance, you mentally simulate that rejection. I actually have a story about this.
Oh, please share.
So a few years ago, I signed up for this weekly pottery class. I was feeling super lonely working from home, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to put myself out there.
The classic adult hobby attempt.
Exactly. So I walk in on the first night, and the studio smells like wet earth and dust, and I'm putting on my little apron, and I look over, and there are 3 women chatting and laughing by the kilns. And instantly my inner conversation started.
What was it saying?
It was saying, oh, they all came together. They're already best friends. If I go over there, I'm just going to be the weird third wheel interrupting them. They definitely don't want to talk to a beginner.
Wow. You just wrote the whole script?
I wrote the whole script. I loaded a corrupted save file before I even booted up the game. I sat at my wheel, staring at my hands, totally closed off. And when one of them did walk by and smiled, I just kind of gave a tight, awkward nod and looked away.
Because you were protecting yourself.
Right. I was mentally practicing being rejected before I even touched the clay.
Yeah.
And then I went home and thought, well, nobody talked to me. I guess I'm just awkward.
It's amazing how we do that. We walk into the room carrying a fully formed narrative of our own exclusion.
We do. We rehearse the rejection so thoroughly that it crystallizes into our psychological baseline. And this leads to Goddard's most famous and frequently misunderstood concept, the idea that everyone is you pushed out.
Which, to be clear to the listener, sounds a bit like mystical solipsism on the surface. We aren't talking about telepathy or magically controlling the minds of the people around us.
Not at all. We are talking about observable behavioral science. The law of assumption dictates that whatever you assume to be true acts as a powerful cognitive and physical lens. If your inner conversation dictates that you are an imposition, you will physically occupy the role of an imposition. You'll hesitate. You'll artificially distance yourself.
Because your assumption directly alters your microexpressions and your body language. Like in your pottery class, your baseline assumption was that you were bothering them, so you subconsciously avoided deep eye contact. Your posture was closed.
Totally closed.
You didn't ask a genuine follow-up question because your primary goal was to politely terminate the interaction before they had the chance to reject you.
Exactly. My assumption fundamentally altered my behavior. And how did those women react? They read my closed posture, my lack of eye contact, and they interpreted those physical cues to mean that I was entirely disinterested in them. So they politely left me alone.
And what does your predictive brain say in that moment? It says, see, I knew they didn't want to talk to me. I was right.
Yes, you inadvertently engineer a self-fulfilling feedback loop entirely generated by a false initial assumption.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because modern empirical psychology maps onto this philosophy with stunning precision. Let's look at the science of the liking gap. There's this landmark research by Erica Boothby and her colleagues that is just fascinating.
Oh, the methodology of this is brilliant. They paired up strangers for a conversation. Afterward, they separated them and asked each person two things. How much did you like your conversation partner? And how much do you believe your partner liked you?
And the divergence between those two metrics is staggering. Across multiple variations, people systematically underestimated how much their conversation partners liked them. We leave almost every interaction believing we performed significantly worse than we actually did.
It's wild.
And this liking gap doesn't just happen at networking events. The data shows this distorted self-perception persists for months as new relationships develop.
It reveals a profound asymmetry in how we evaluate social interactions. When you are in a conversation, you have full access to your own internal monologue. You can feel your heart racing. You know when you stumbled over a word. You are acutely aware of your own anxiety.
But the other person can't see any of that.
Right. They do not have access to your internal data. They only see your external behavior. They see you nodding, smiling, and asking questions. We judge ourselves by our internal anxiety, but they are judging us by our external warmth.
I can walk away from a chat agonizing over the fact that I rambled about my dog for 2 minutes, thinking I was unbearably annoying. Meanwhile, the other person's walking away and thinking, wow, they were so engaging and open.
This asymmetry fuels what psychologists call interpretation bias. Because we are preloaded with the assumption that we don't belong, our brains actively scan the environment for evidence to confirm that fear. We take highly ambiguous, perfectly neutral data points and instantly interpret them as definitive proof of rejection.
I see this constantly. Let's say you're talking to someone, and mid-story, they physically turn their body slightly toward the door. The objective, neutral fact is simply their torso rotated 30 degrees. But because of interpretation bias, my brain synthesizes that into a devastating narrative. It says they're desperately scanning the room for an escape route because I am boring them to death.
Then in reality, their lower back might just hurt, or they might be looking for the waiter.
Exactly. Or consider text messaging, which is an absolute minefield of interpretation bias.
Oh, the worst.
The factual event is, they have not responded to my message for 6 hours. But the assumption hijacks the fact. The assumption says they regret giving me their number and are trying to ghost me. The reality could be that they're driving, they're in a meeting, or they just forgot. We consistently confuse our brain's anxious predictions with objective reality.
So what does this all mean for us? If we know the structure requires 60 hours, and we know our brains are actively working against us with interpretation bias and the liking gap, how do we actually intervene?
Right, because the answer can't just be to stand in front of a mirror and chant, everyone loves me.
No. Our brains are too smart to believe manufactured toxic positivity. Extreme positive affirmations often backfire because they trigger cognitive dissonance. You don't need to adopt the identity of, I am the most charismatic person in the room and everyone is captivated by me. That is too far a leap from your current baseline.
So what do we do instead?
We use a practical grounding tool. We call it the social assumption audit.
I find the mechanics of this so useful. It's essentially an interrupter for your brain's predictive engine.
Exactly. I want to invite you, the listener, to practice this with us right now. Take a deep breath.
Just let your shoulders drop.
Before you walk into the meetup or before you send that follow-up text, you pause and audit the narrative. You ask yourself, what am I already predicting is going to happen? What underlying fear is currently dictating my posture and my choices? Are you predicting that everyone in the room is cliquey? Are you assuming your text will be a burden?
Once you isolate that corrupted save file, how do you rewrite it?
You replace the negative assumption not with forced positivity, but with absolute neutrality. You adopt an open identity. Your new baseline assumption becomes, I am allowed to participate. I do not have to be chosen by the group before I'm allowed to engage. I am simply here to be curious about other people.
I am allowed to participate. Wow. That completely changes the stakes of the interaction. You are no longer auditioning for the role of best friend. You are just a person exercising your basic right to exist in a shared space. And when you lower the stakes to that neutral baseline, you make it neurologically possible to execute the next vital tool, which is the one-bid practice.
A bid is a foundational concept in relationship psychology. It is any attempt, however microscopic, to connect with another human being. It can be verbal or nonverbal.
The genius of the one-bid practice is that it bypasses the overwhelm of the 60-hour rule. You don't have to carry the entire weight of forming a deep friendship in one night. Your only objective is to make one low-risk bid.
Right. That might look like noticing someone holding a book and asking, is that any good? It might mean choosing to sit in the chair next to an acquaintance instead of isolating yourself at the empty table in the back.
Just one small move.
The discipline of this practice is twofold. First, you must initiate the bid. You have to gently toss the ball over the net. But secondly, and this is where most people struggle, you must give the other person the space to respond without panicking. You do not bombard them with 10 consecutive bids, and you do not instantly assume rejection if they don't return the volley with massive enthusiasm.
But this touches on a massive pain point for so many people. The most common frustration I hear is the fatigue of always being the initiator. People will say, I'm always the one sending the first text. I'm always the one organizing the coffee. If they actually wanted to be my friend, they would reach out to me.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
It feels deeply humiliating to feel like you are chasing someone who doesn't care.
We have to draw a very firm line here. Initiation is not the same thing as chasing. It is a common cognitive distortion to assume that affection requires perfect 50-50 symmetry from day one. But human beings are incredibly complex and often highly dysregulated.
That's true.
The person you're reaching out to might be navigating severe social anxiety, they might be deeply overwhelmed by their career, or they might just suffer from terrible executive function when it comes to their phone. Many people are genuinely enthusiastic responders, but chronically poor initiators.
So how do we distinguish between someone who is just a poor initiator and someone who is genuinely signaling that they want to be left alone? Where is the line between persistence and a lack of self-respect?
You evaluate their response to your bid rather than keeping a tally of who initiated. You look for the quality of reciprocity. When you text them, do they respond with warmth and follow-up questions? If you invite them to a class and they are busy, do they offer an alternative date or just leave it at a flat no?
Right.
If they are engaging warmly and making conversational space for you, they are reciprocating, even if you are the one doing the heavy lifting of scheduling. You only need to withdraw your energy if you are met with consistent, vague dismissals and a lack of conversational engagement.
Okay, so we are auditing our assumptions, we are shifting into a neutral mindset of curiosity, and we are making small bids while looking for warm reciprocity. But practically speaking, how do we accumulate those required 40 to 60 hours without burning out?
This is where we lean on the beauty of weak ties.
This concept completely shattered my understanding of what a fulfilling social life actually looks like.
It is incredibly relieving. Sociologists divide our networks into strong ties, our intimate friends and family, and weak ties, which are the acquaintances we see peripherally. Research shows that regular interactions with weak ties provide a massive, measurable boost to our psychological well-being and our sense of belonging.
Because they require zero emotional heavy lifting. You don't have to be deeply vulnerable with the barista who knows your regular order. You don't have to bare your soul to the person who always sets up their yoga mat next to yours.
Right, you just say hi.
But those micro-interactions send a signal to your nervous system that you are recognized, that you are part of a tribe. They satisfy the biological imperative without the exhaustion of the friendship audition.
Exactly. And relying on weak ties points us toward the ultimate structural hack for adult friendship: recurring spaces. If you know you need 60 hours to build a friendship, you do not want to try and accumulate those hours through forced one-on-one coffee dates. The logistical friction is just too high.
You accumulate them passively by placing yourself in a recurring environment, a weekly volunteer shift, a running club, that pottery class. You let the architecture of the space do the heavy lifting of the mere exposure effect for you. You just keep showing up to the same room at the same time, and the familiarity builds itself in the background.
You align your behavior with the structural reality rather than fighting against it.
This entire deep dive has been just a masterclass in recontextualizing how we operate in the world. If we look at the trajectory of what we've covered, we started by validating the friction. Adult friendship is objectively difficult. It requires immense proximity, it requires mathematical repetition, and it requires the emotional endurance to sit through the awkwardness of those early hours.
But we also learned that the most impenetrable barrier isn't the modern world's busy schedule. The thickest wall is the mental simulation we run before we even open our mouths. It is the unchecked assumption of our own rejection, which fuels the interpretation bias, turning every delayed text and neutral glance into a devastating failure.
We don't need to transform into hypercharismatic extroverts.
Yeah.
We just need to stop pre-installing the failure. We have to stop rehearsing rejection so flawlessly that genuine connection never even gets a chance to boot up.
It ultimately comes down to becoming available for connection, lowering the psychological shield just long enough and just far enough to make one authentic bid.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. Think about the spaces you move through your office, your gym, your neighborhood. What is one specific corrupted assumption you are ready to audit and leave at the door? And more importantly, what is one small, low-stakes bid for connection that you can initiate this week, knowing that you are fully allowed to participate?
And as you think about stepping into that recurring space and making that bid, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time today talking about the reality that it takes 40 to 60 hours of accumulated time to forge a real friendship. When we walk into a crowded room, our interpretation bias tells us that everyone else has already completed their 60 hours. We assume everyone is already full.
Yeah, that they don't need us.
Right. But consider this. What if the person standing across from you, the one you assume is too busy, too established, or too cool for you? What if they are currently sitting in their own lonely 40-hour waiting period, quietly scanning the room, hoping that you will be the one brave enough to make the next move?
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today.
Thanks for joining us on Vibrations and Manifestations. We'll see you next time.